to the Cyber Clinic update, cyber threats and coronavirus. Our weekly update this week recorded to be sent out, so you can all enjoy the long weekend and watch this at your leisure. Just going through the agenda today, intros by me, quick update on the Cyber Clinic. Tom Cartledge with his usual update on threat intelligence. Rob Sugry, our head of technical operations, to talk through practical steps for defence in this new way of working. And then Lee Larson, our CSOC manager, some trends, some lessons learned from the CSOC at this time as well. So no further ado, just a reminder of the Cyber Clinic, as it is being recorded today. Obviously, you can't ask any questions at the end. Please feel free to use the email address provided here to ask any questions about the event, but also any other advisory questions relating to cyber that you may have. cyberclinic@6dg.co.uk, and it's also on the website if you need to find it there. Presentation, protected marking, as usual, it is traffic light protocol green, which means it's for general broadcast. And with no further ado, I shall just pass over to Tom Cartledge for the latest updates.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just a quick update from me about coronavirus and cyber threats. As I've spoken before many times, there's various campaigns going on. I just want to highlight some that have come to light this week. So the FBI have recently warned of business email compromise and a likely increase in it due to coronavirus. What is business email compromise? This is where criminals will impersonate an organisation to fraudulently obtain finances, probably from another business. So they gave a couple of examples. One of them I've highlighted here. So a company that was dealing with the CEO of a different organisation in legitimate communications pre-coronavirus, that CEO had his email impersonated by a criminal who then emailed the organisation asking to have a $1 million payment brought forward. So the criminal used an email address which looks similar to the genuine address, either that the name was the same and the email address was different, or that the email address was different but only a couple of letters have been changed from the original one. Please ensure that all your finance teams that deal with payments and deal with client payments are aware of any changes in payment schedules due to coronavirus. If you do receive an email like this, make sure it is from a genuine sender. And before any changes are made, please contact your opposite number in that organisation via another means, probably a known telephone number, and confirm that any such change or request is genuine. And Microsoft have reported this week about the stats around coronavirus themed cyber attacks. So they're seeing approximately 60,000 daily phishing messages related to coronavirus, which contain links or attachments which contain malware. They're also seeing TrickBot and Emotet. So these are two malware groups that have been around for quite a while. And they've also seen them pivot on coronavirus as well. So they've seen a total of 76 total campaigns involving TrickBot and Emotet trying to exploit coronavirus. And then finally, more UK focused about ongoing SMS or smishing, as it's called, phishing attempts. So just before I mention that, I'll just talk about a broader theme we're seeing. There's a number of companies out there, including a large US insurance firm, which, because of the financial dire straits many of their clients find themselves in, are offering financial breaks. They're either repaying customers directly or they're offering reduced terms. Now, a lot of these organisations are doing, don't call us because we're busy, we'll call you about this. Now, this is potentially opening up these organisations to financial scams, because if they're saying, look, we're going to contact you with a potential repayment, criminals will see that as a golden opportunity to impersonate them. Unfortunately, this has happened with two travel firms. So both TUI and Jet2 this week have said that they're cancelling holidays during the coronavirus outbreak. So, for example, Jet2 said, look, we won't phone you, don't phone us because our call centre is very busy. We'll contact you. So there is now an SMS phishing campaign going around impersonating both TUI and Jet2 for people to click on and supposedly claim refunds. There's also various SMS phishing campaigns ongoing around the UK about lockdown procedures. So this is one about being sent to people saying you've got to pay a fine because you've broken lockdown procedure. SMS, it's very difficult to understand whether the sender is genuine. If you do receive an SMS message, don't click on the link, even if you do think it's genuine. That would be my advice. But actually go onto the website of the supposed sender organisation and then look for information on there that would have been contained in that SMS message. Okay. Next, I'll just move on to Zoom and some of the issues around that, as many people have asked us questions around Zoom. So as you've seen, there's been a lot of headlines around Zoom and how insecure it is. So, for example, videos have been found online of supposedly private conference calls. There's been multiple security flaws exposed by various security researchers. There's been malicious domains which have offered supposed Zoom, but in fact it's malware. And also various organizations have stopped their members using Zoom. So the governments of Taiwan and Canada, but also corporate Google has stopped their staff using Zoom for teleconferencing. So what has the response from Zoom been on this? And of course, this is just a very quick summary. Many of the security flaws have actually been updated by Zoom in their latest sort of update download. They've switched all their developmental effort onto security and privacy issues. And they've also hired in a number of high-profile CISOs to either work with them directly or provide them advice on security issues. So what is the so what for you as an end user? What is our suggested action? Firstly, I would say if you want to know more about this in detail, then please do contact the Cyber Clinic in the address that Phil has just mentioned. But I would personally recommend that you update Zoom with the latest updates. As I said, this will cover a lot of the security flaws that have been mentioned. But make sure you keep your meetings private and follow the suggested advice on how to mitigate any risks around that. But also, I would recommend if you are using a teleconferencing tool to discuss particularly sensitive subjects, either state secrets or company intellectual property, I would recommend that you probably, for the time being, do not use Zoom and seek to use another teleconferencing tool. Thank you.
So just passing over to Rob Thugger. It's interesting, actually, with regards to Zoom, it is one example of some of the stuff that Rob is about to talk about, where applications or the control of users has moved outside of the old norm. So over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Phil. If you can just transition the slides in. I'm just going to give everybody a bit of an overview of where we were and the environments that we were working in and where we've ended up now and what that really means with just some practical advice and guidance to make sure we're doing everything that we can to protect ourselves at this very unusual time. So sort of just looking at where we used to be in our controlled, contained infrastructures, we did have our perimeter security. We had very controlled environments. We knew what our users were doing. We were checking their logging on, we were checking their authentication, making sure they're changing passwords, the passwords are the correct length, etc. We're making sure our systems are updated. We had our WSUS servers, our AV update servers. We were making sure that everything was working properly. We had assured service access. We were able to control our internet access using proxies. If something did come to light that we needed to quickly resolve, we could very quickly push out a GPO across our estate to make sure that that update was applied to all of our users. We might have even been using IDS, NetFlow, user behavioral analytics to see what the normal patterns of behavior were in our environments. And of course, we were all controlling this with a firewall, our access control, to protect ourselves from what was going out of our network, but more importantly into our network, making sure people weren't coming in. I mean, even if we then look at how we extended that in the traditional VPN extended infrastructure, where we may have had a few remote workers or people that came in and out of the office and were connecting in, even though they're remote, we were using those VPN clients. They were controlled. They still had those same benefits. But where we are now is moving into our current reality, and our current reality is very different. So if you could just transition that last piece in. What we've got now is where we've had to avoid the use of the VPN. I heard a CEO of a very large security organization this week saying the VPN is dead. And that is very much the case for a lot of us. We've gone to pure cloud connectivity to ensure that our workers are able to do what they can do. In some cases, we're using VPN, but in a lot of the cases, our clients are out there directly connecting into O365, into software as a service that may sit on a cloud somewhere. And they're out on the internet at home on an unprotected, unfirewalled connection. I mean, we all have our broadband routers that might be provided by Virgin or Sky, but the protection they offer is very limited. So our users out there aren't just able to connect to the things we want them to, they can connect to the things we don't want them to, the dark web, the torrents, the freeware, the phishing sites. So moving forward, and to help all of us to secure our environments as much as possible in these cases, we have to do what we can, and we have to empower our users, communicate with our users, make sure that they're using their computers properly. If we can enable the local firewall on their machine, make sure it is enabled. If we can make sure that they're able to get out and update their antivirus, or if there's a process that you need your users to follow so that they click on that on a daily basis to make sure they're getting the updates they need, let's tell them how to do that. Let's make sure they're getting their operating system updated, that it's patched, that it's all up to date, and all of the risk that that does mitigate is mitigated for them. Our users are our key members in this particular scenario. We need them to recognize phishing attempts. We need them to understand why they shouldn't go out to websites that they wouldn't normally do. We need for them to work from their home environments the same way as if they were working in the office. Don't visit sites that you wouldn't visit in the office. Be careful, be cautious. We often say our users are the weakest link, but they're also our first line of defense. And I think at times like this, we need to keep those communications up with them, keep advising them, remind them on the policies that we have to assure safety, and also make sure they're doing what they can do to make sure their machines are as secure as possible. From that, I will just hand over to Lee. He'll be able to talk about some of the trends that he's seeing in the CSOC, and also how he's helping some of our clients at the moment protect their environments by utilizing technology that does help in the current reality. So
some on this webinar may already be familiar with what a SOC service is, so I don't really want to go into too much detail, though I do want to give a bit of an example as the fundamentals, just so that those that aren't aware understand going forward. So a SOC combines a number of device feeds, which allows analysts to build up a picture of what's happening on a company's estate. This is a 24/7 team that monitors a client's environment for potential risks, identifying those potential attacks sooner, coordinating a response with you, and helping mitigate any potential damage. I'm explaining this because over the last few weeks and months, we've seen a massive change in the trend, a massive swap in the baseline, which we kind of deem normal going forward, is really changing how we view that picture of your environment. So we want to explain how we can best support you and your workforce moving forward. So one big area is the scams targeting remote workers. So as you can see from the graph on the right, there's been a massive uplift in the attacks on endpoints and the phishing attacks. So phishing attacks has risen by 667%, while attacks on endpoints has risen by 314%. So previously, prior to COVID-19, there were an average of 37 attacks per 1,000 devices. However, now there's 145 attacks per 1,000 devices for the end user. So that's why we're really focusing on how we can better suit that environment. So usually monitoring an environment, an analyst would be asking themselves, is it routine activity? Is the location common with that organization? If the end user is trying to log in, is that authentication during working hours? However, with flexible working, people are starting sooner and earlier in the mornings, and they're working longer hours into the night. So the normal has changed. The normal periods of 9 to 5 working has completely gone from what we see as a baseline for activity. So what this means is when we're trying to analyze the network, there's longer hours of white noise. And it's harder to determine whether a user is committing the activity completely innocently or whether it's triaged to a further extent. Another point is that VPNs are now heavily utilized, which means the geographical location of the source can be masked. Companies are putting in more of an emphasis on collaboration tools such as Teams and SharePoint. And this means that the logs in which companies are putting more of a focus on is in different areas on their estate. So the SOC is really having to relearn patterns of activity. Again, another area which is a massive uplift is the bring your own device when working from home. So a number of companies have really struggled with the rapid requirement to work from home, meaning that some companies didn't have the capability of the resources to deploy enough infrastructure which adheres to corporate security policy. Many employees are working from their own device, meaning that they're accessing your business infrastructure from potentially compromised devices. So in the previous way of working, in the 9 to 5 office environment, companies would often carry out pen tests or vulnerability scans to determine where the potential areas of weakness are. However, how is a company reviewing the cybersecurity hygiene now that people are bringing their own devices and connecting to the network? So as I kind of said, during working hours, it's kind of end users may be strict on what they kind of navigate to. They may be only focused on work-related content, emails, and office applications. However, what state was that device in prior to remote working? Who's using that device outside of working hours? Is the father using it or the mother using it during working hours, and then it's changing to the kid using it out of hours? And what's being downloaded on that device? All these questions could have a detrimental impact on your client, your networks. So as an example, Firefox have released a patch mitigating a 0-day, but which users are still using Firefox and who's patched that browser? So another area is the network changes. So one area which would focus on is network changes being carried out. So sometimes they're carried out out of hours so that it doesn't impact the day-to-day working environment. However, some companies, due to the reduced staff count, have implemented freeze changes, while others carry on as normal. So again, that baseline of activity has changed. Another areas which we're having to contend with is, during this turbulent time, a lot of companies have had to make that hard decision to reduce the number of staff. This means that individuals in a position of work are focusing on different tasks and additional tasks. So they're requesting access to different areas where they previously didn't. So while this internally may appear usual activity, for us as analysts, we could see this as an example of pivoting. So when a malicious actor gets access to your network, they can create new users, escalate their permissions, add themselves to different security groups, all to obtain a malicious intent. It also means that staff are busier and potentially less attentive to the software that they're downloading to carry out this additional tasks. With IT teams stretched and end users may become impatient and just download software completely innocently, though potentially damaging to your company. So with the monitoring of devices, as I kind of pointed to earlier, there's more of a focus on the prominent key assets. There was an emphasis on the key assets, so servers, firewalls, and boundary devices to identify what's coming in and out of your network. However, with this new normal, the remote working pattern, there is a stronger focus to give greater awareness to endpoint management and the monitoring of end user activity. So with that rapid deployment of laptops, people may not be accessing your core infrastructure via VPN on an hourly basis. So who's monitoring what they're doing? And one consideration is, like, in addition to any other type of attack, this is a perfect time for a disgruntled employee to be looking how to best exploit a company at this vulnerable time. We're in the SOC already seeing a number of users which have conducted activity against corporate policy. And all this means is companies having to rethink their cybersecurity model. So what does it mean to you? And that's the key thing. Again, so like I said, the previous focus was on key assets, the boundary devices and the servers. However, it's not about shifting the focus, because it would be very counterproductive to go from monitoring your key devices to making sure your end users are covered to the nth degree, returning to the office to realize your core infrastructure is now compromised. So things like user education, as Rob pointed to, have never been more prevalent. So one would hope in the office, guarded by corporate security and the measures taken, a user may accidentally click somewhere or do something that the damage would either be detected or blocked. But at home, the Achilles heels for many organizations is currently how to protect that end user. So again, looking at application security, many people are focusing on Office 365 or security software as a service and how to best secure them. So one analogy I've heard recently, and I think it's quite good, was companies have spent years adding to their security measures, building up a castle of their core infrastructure with perimeter defenses, internal protection, and hardened security measures. Now, with the current way of working, this castle now has no walls. Their attacks can come from anywhere. So, as briefed on last week's webinar, Office 365 has a number of security features which may not be being utilized to their full potential. Office 365 has a few key policies such as data loss prevention, which will detect sensitive information which is being exfiltrated from your network, such as credit card details, passport numbers, or national insurance numbers. There's the advanced threat protection policy, which will identify malicious documents and block them so that no other user can download it and spread it across the network. And also there's the safe attachment policies, looking for emails with obviously safe attachments and making sure that's not malicious getting spread across the network. But if alerts for these policies are enabled, who's managing them? So who's reviewing these logs, and is that escalation chain still viable while in this period of remote working? So there's a couple of other policies which I think are worth noting as well, is the acceptable use policy, the incident management policy, and the data handling policy that your company adheres to. So have the new devices that have been distributed in the deployment, have they been assessed for the value of that asset and how it should be handled? The information should be classified in accordance to the confidentiality of its content, and ensuring that people have a baseline of how to use that device. Has the incident management chain, as that's a key process in any organization, is that still there and being able to be actioned if required? So the ICO have already said that they're operating as normal, and it would expect companies to adhere to the regulations that have been pushed out previously. So is your process internally still operational? Is there people in place to action that if required? And the data handling policy, remember that home remote users may be accessing your corporate information from unsecured or unsafe Wi-Fi networks. Now, while I understand that the level of security may not be possible to be the same while in this remote phase, but companies should be pushing to get as close to best practices as possible. So finally, I just want to click on what you guys can do. So I've already highlighted the importance of user education and looking at the phishing attempts and focusing on the data handling and acceptable use policies. But as Rob alluded to as well, the antiviruses and the Windows defenders, that making sure they're up to date and making sure they're turned on to give at least a limited amount of protection. So looking at that user, so it's reported that 95% of all breaches are due to human error, and that was prior to COVID-19. So I believe now that end users are more vulnerable, given that the increase of phishing attacks and the attacks on endpoints. Just focusing on making sure your policies are up to date, making sure that they are being reviewed continuously and they've incorporated the remote working kind of process which everyone is going through at the moment. Have the Office 365 rules been turned on if you've got the license to do so? And if not, has the question been asked to say, should we have an uplift of license? One area I want to focus as well on is the access control. So there's a number of companies out there which have far too many local admin rights for end users. This means that they can download and run and save anything they wish to. So I just want to focus on pushing people down the principle of least privileges. At the end of the day, the more permissions people have, the more damage they're likely to do, or potentially can do, sorry. And again, one of the pieces I consider most important at this time is the endpoint management. I can't stress that enough. There's a real emphasis on the endpoint security and the application logs, securing that end users by implementing more security on Office 365, who's reviewing the alarms and reviewing the activity. This will go a long way to ensuring that you have at least a degree of protection. So I just want to point out as well the car wash approach. So this is so our 6 degrees Chief Information Security Officer will be discussing next week, Paul Rose. So it's how that you can go from the period we're in now, the remote working, to the transitional phased approach of bringing users back into the office. And that'll be a case of making sure the devices are cleaned before they're connected back to your network. There's no point connecting them back on just to see a virus or any malicious software go rampant across your network. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Rob. As I say, this week obviously has been recorded. Next week, we will be back to live for you. And as discussed there, it will be Paul Rose and sort of this car wash approach and how we kind of organise ourselves to get back to what may be normal working practices if you decide not to change them. Just to leave you with the cyber clinic at 6dg.co.uk again, please feel free to email in. For those who are working at the SOC this weekend and watching this, enjoy your day at work. And to everybody else, I do wish you a very nice Easter, although it might be slightly different as well. Thank you all again and see you soon.
Thank you.